Hey, it's Stefan Angelini. Thanks for joining me for another little economic wrap where we look around the world and see what's come out in financial media that might be beneficial to you. It's the 24th of April, 2023, and it is the day before Anzac Day. So considering we live in such a lucky country, I thought, why not educate everyone on just what happened all that 110 odd years ago, 109 years ago, and I guess pay respect to the Australians past that made us the country we are today. Then after that, we're going to look into what's happening at the Reserve Bank and the changes that are proposed and really what's going to happen there. And we'll look into the emergence of private credit. And that's why that's one of the most, I guess, emerging asset classes that's coming through right now. So just letting you know, if you want any personal advice, please go and consult your licensed financial advisor. This is just all general information, please. So please don't take it as personal advice. Now, if you want to listen to the full episode, head on over to the Real World Podcast with Stefan Angelini. If you're not already here, if you are here, thanks for listening. Let's get into it. So let's talk about Anzac Day and the Anzac. So obviously Anzac Day is the 25th of April, and it's one of the most important national occasions we have. It marks the anniversary of the first major military action fought by the Australian and New Zealand armed forces in World War I. It was a long time ago. So let me just bring you right back. War broke out in 1914, and Australia, of course, was part of the Commonwealth. So the UK called them up and said, hey, let's go. And then in 1915, the Australian and New Zealand soldiers formed part of the expedition that went out to capture what was then, or capture the Gallipoli Peninsula. Now, this was to open up the Dardanelles to the Allied navies. The ultimate objective here was to capture Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, or the capital of the Ottoman Empire, which was an ally of Germany. So what exactly happened? Australian and New Zealand armed forces on the 25th of April landed on Gallipoli and met fierce resistance from the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Now, this battle, what they thought was going to be quick and smooth, ended up dragging out for 8 months. And there was more than 8,000 Australian soldiers that died in the campaign for Gallipoli. Unfortunately, by the end of it, the Australian and New Zealand troops withdrew from the area. But April 25 soon became the day on which we remember Australians and New Zealand soldiers for the sacrifice they made for dying at war. Now, this leaves a powerful legacy of what's known as the Anzacs. And this is the identity they leave behind. So people that were not afraid to go off and fight, and basically allow us to establish the nation that we now have, that I truly love and cherish. So make sure you take a minute of silence tomorrow to cherish, to remember those that we lost, lest we forget. Now let's look around the market. The RBA is maybe changing. So there's a proposal from the Treasury based on recommendations that were undertaken pre-COVID. And basically the initial recommendations were that the Reserve Bank was not doing a good enough job because inflation was too low and was not within the 2 to 3% band. Now, inflation's too high. They're saying the RBA didn't act quick enough. But really, what the two little things they're doing is they're proposing to put more cooks in the kitchen. And one thing we know is that the more cooks in the kitchen, generally, the harder it is to get a response or a logical answer. But also, they're proposing the RBA meets less. So less meetings means, I guess, less guidance. And we know this guidance is imperative for a lot of economists' recommendations and policymaking, especially when it comes to banks and things like that. So a few little changes that they may make that may make huge ramifications in terms of the more cooks in the kitchen. They're proposing that there's less, I guess, what's the best way to put it? Educated scholars on the board and more real people, I guess, successful business people that will be there to, I guess, stand up for or be in place for the everyday person to actually tell them what's happening on the ground and what they're seeing. So it may be good, it may be bad, we don't really know. We'll see what happens, but there will be changes coming. We're going to look quickly at private debt and what's fueling this Australian lending landscape shift. So obviously, you had the GFC, banks were struck down pretty hard, but now banks no longer able, and in a lot of cases, no longer willing to service the needs of small scale borrowers. Now, what that means is that small businesses, and some home buyers are frozen out of the market just because traditional banking won't allow them to get involved. Instead, investors and private lenders are now entering the framework, and they're keen to plug the gap in the sectors by offering these new lines of credit. So the Australian debt market is surging right now, and you would see a lot of it. And we're seeing a lot more providers come onto the market. Just to let you know how little Australian does in this space, on average, 12% of the world's credit is provided by private investors and non-bank lenders. In Australia, it's only 2%. So it's quite small. And you see in the US, there's a massive portion of the market is private credit and private debt. And in the UK, very, very similar. Now, some reasons people love it is because generally there's looser regulation amongst private credit because they don't have the different banking regulations to go by. There's better connections with the needs of borrowers because they're actually establishing credit that people want, not just what the bank regulation provides. And there's limited lending scope. So they will target certain parts of the market, which they see as beneficial. We're seeing this as a huge area. We're seeing a lot of money flowing to the space, and it basically allows people to get involved in different kinds of lending and not just buy a bank because they provide debt. That's a few small little updates from me today. Go off, have a great Anzac Day, having a public holiday. Make sure you take your minute of silence. Thank you to everyone who gave up their time and effort to become an Anzac. If you are anyone that's in the armed forces, thank you. And finally, go Pies.